All right, so here's my disclaimer.
I have no idea.
I am
You're like,
not an expert on any of this at all. And I will attempt to do my best to help you understand the gritty details here to the best of my ability. And at the same time, I will refer you to resources to answer your questions, but I'll try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. So, a couple weeks ago, it seems like forever ago now, we looked at Daniel 10 to 12, and I made the promise. I said, if you want to know more, and those of you who are here and those of you who are watching, you get to know more now as to Daniel 10, 11, and 12, and what it exactly means here. So, with that said, we are going to just dive right in here. So, Daniel chapter 10 says this. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it was concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks and ate no choice food. No meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until 3 weeks were over. So, what's happening here is Daniel is still So first of all, let's kind of narrow in some years here, okay? So, Israel, so basically the 3rd year of King Cyrus, which also in other places will be referred to as the 1st year of King Cyrus, because the way people tend to look at this and everything, they will say that this will be the 1st year of Cyrus because it's his 1st year that he is the sole ruler of the Persian Empire. I don't have a source for that. Off top in my notes here, so you can do more research on that one. But the point being is this: is that this year is basically, because the Persian kept such good records, we can point to it is between 536 and 535 BC. With that said, if you go back and remember in time, Israel was taken captain in 605 BC. So we're talking about the 70 years at this point in time. Do you remember that from the book of Jeremiah? You remember when the Israelites were taking, or the Jerusalem, really the people of Judah, were taken into captivity by Babylon, and they were shipped off. And so basically, we are now at this point where we are at the end. Now, the dates can get a little bit fuzzy and a little bit messy here, but I just wanted to kind of put you in a ballpark here that you can kind of see this and kind of wrap your arms around it, right? Because there is some point where basically they started, the decree that they could go back actually happens 2 years prior to this. So, but whatever the case is, we are right in this sweet spot of presumably about 70 years. So the pilgrimage has already happened. People are starting to lead back. And so Daniel is now, he has some understanding of the vision of chapter 9. And he's trying to kind of wrestle with what he's seen, what he is kind of going through here. And he's praying hard. And it makes sense why he's praying hard. We see this in in verse 3. He says, I ate no choice foods or meat, touched my lips. He's basically in mourning, or he is denying himself pleasure so he can focus more intently on God. And so this is why he's doing it, is because of all these inner workings that are happening politically around him. The Israelites are going back to Jerusalem. And he is not going to make the trek. He is now an octogenarian, presumably. And so, and he has lived all his life in most of his life in Babylon. So he's like, you know what? Just going to stay here, continue doing what I'm doing. But he's still very concerned about his people. He's very concerned about all these things. And so this is kind of the precursor in which we have this kind of takes place here. And so Daniel basically has some understanding of the vision that he had back in chapter 9 here, which basically is that Jerusalem will be rebuilt and the Messiah will come. That understanding, presumably he has some understanding with what she says here, that there's something that he's beginning to understand. And so then we have the chapter 10 really is this introduction to a vision. And so basically, he's standing along the shore of a river, and all these guys are with him. And basically, all of a sudden, Daniel's the only one who's seeing anything, but all the other guys who are with him freak out and run off. And so Daniel then passes out and then wakes up. And then basically, it's the precursor to this vision here. So let me read you Daniel 11. I'm sorry, chapter 10, verses 11 through 14. And he said, there is a spiritual being. Some will say this is an angel. Some will say this is the term can be used either theophany or Christophany. Basically, this is a pre-carnate version of Christ. There is an argument there. I'm not sure which one I really buy. I think I lean more towards angel and not Jesus. However, there are some striking similarities here between the description of this guy. So if you look at verse 6 here, it says his body was like beryl and his face like the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and legs gleam with burnished bronze. And so this description lines up really well of a description we have of Jesus in the book of Revelation. So for what it's worth, I'm not sure. I wish I could be conclusive in everything. I think I'm leaning more towards an angel in this case. But for our purposes as Christians, it shouldn't really matter, right? What matters is this, is Daniel has received this vision, and it came from God, whether it came directly from a pre-incarnate form of Jesus, or if it came from an angel, it came from God. And so this is where I'm setting up here. So, with that said here, Daniel begins to... Did I read all this yet? No, I haven't read this yet. He said to Daniel, so this guy who's giving this vision, he basically says this. He says, Daniel, you are highly esteemed. And consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you. And stand up, for now I have been sent to you. And when he said to me, I stood up trembling. And then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and humble yourself before your God. Your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future for the visions concerning a time yet to come. All right. So did you catch everything that just happened there? Sure. Oh, sure. All right. So things are about to get a little weird.
Start to get weird.
But here's and this is one of those things, right? Like, we are of a Western culture mindset, so we don't really like to think of a spiritual world, just by nature, right? We have science, we explain things. If we see someone who seems to have some sort of, we would call it mental illness, the first thing that pops into our mind is that, they're schizophrenic. We don't think demon possession, right? That's just how we are programmed to think. That's how we work. I'm not trying to assume anything about mental health here. My point being is this, is that there is a spiritual realm. And so we as Christians tend to kind of look past that. So I'm going to briefly camp out here for a second, but I want you to kind of see exactly what was said here. So in verse 11, what he says is, consider carefully the words that I'm about to speak to you. This being, and again, the reason why I consider this to be an angel is because I don't think that God could be held up here. That's just my thought process, right? But regardless, this is where we're going here, right? And he wants to make sure that Daniel is paying close attention. Why do you think this being is so concerned about Daniel being able to pay attention to this?
Because it's really important.
Because it's really important. And what do you do with things that are really important?
I mean, you want to remember them.
You want to remember them. And how do you remember them?
Writing them.
You write them down? We have cell phones, so I'm making
Tell
notes.
other people.
My life is dictated by a calendar on my phone that is synced to my wife's right now. If we remember to put everything in and actually get the settings all right, because otherwise we won't be in the right place at the right time because we have so many. Because we have 5 kids, there's so many things going on, right? And it's the thing, right? Writing them down is important. You want to remember them, and so whatever the case is, this being wants to make it very, very clear that Daniel needs to be paying attention and remembering, because this is important, and he wants him to get this down. This isn't just like Daniel having a nightmare and he wakes up going, oh, that was terrifying. This is, no. I want you to be very, very clear and make sure that we have this. So verse 13, this is where it gets weird. It says, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained by the king of Persia. So, let's talk about what Michael Heiser, he is a theologian, would call the unseen realm. He actually wrote a book called The Unseen Realm. There's actually a documentary that was done that now is free on YouTube from Logos, that Michael Heiser has put together and everything, called The Unseen Realm. I've only gotten myself halfway through. But one of the things that his kind of notion, and I won't go into depth of his stuff right now because we don't have entire time for this, is that our understanding of spiritual beings is not right. So, let me ask you, who are the angels?
Messengers.
Messengers, okay.
Created beings.
They're created beings, okay.
Spiritual beings.
Spiritual beings, okay.
They must be really scary.
They're really scary, okay.
Because every time they show up, they say, don't be afraid.
They don't.
They worship God in heaven.
They worship God in heaven, sure.
They have choices about how to appear, but sometimes they can be we can sit. They're supposed to be unaware, or
We can
have angels
entertain
unaware.
them.
Yeah.
So maybe they have choices in how they
They might be able to appear as people, even possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
possibly.
So, trying to figure out, I've been wrestling with how to frame this exactly. So with that said, what we see here is we see this being, which I believe it's a spiritual being of some sort, I believe it to be an angel, has been dispensed to come and talk to Daniel. However, he couldn't get there. The words were heard, but he couldn't get there. Why couldn't he get there?
Because the prince of the Persian kingdom
All right.
resisted him.
So let's be very clear. We're not talking about a person right now. We're talking about another spiritual being.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I want to jump down?
So,
It's in the verse 13. Yes.
so angels being willing servants to God,
They are.
and the prince of Persia, right? Prince of the Persian kingdom, would that potentially be like a demon? Because it doesn't say Satan.
So I think and the answer would be yes. And this is one of these weird concepts that we haven't really thought about before, and this is what Michael Heiser kind of goes and writes this whole book on. And basically, he writes this book and he goes, after you read this book, there's a website you need to go to, because now you have to relearn, like, it changes the way you look at everything. So anyway, fascinating stuff. I haven't gotten through it all myself, but this is the point for our purposes here, because it's in Scripture and it's pretty easy to kind of point to. Is that, have you ever thought or realized that there are angels that represent or are in charge of groups of people?
I know that there seem to be demons, but not necessarily on the good side of angels.
So if you look at verse 13 here, we see as Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. And I think at one point, I'm trying to remember where it is now because there's so much here. It basically is saying that, like, Michael is Israel's, like, angel here, right? Like, Michael...
It says that in 21.
21, I'm sorry. like I said, there's been so much I'm trying to kind of condense down here. So in 21, basically it says it's like, Michael is yours, right? So like when we think of like Michael the Archangel and everything like that, and we think about all the imagery around him and everything, and that terrible John Travolta movie, no. If you didn't see that terrible John Travolta movie, neither did I. We're probably all better off for it. Wasn't terrible?
It wasn't good, but
Yeah.
You just said it wasn't
It
terrible.
had a Goo Goo Dolls song in it and just made that song even worse. So, but anyway, let's move on. So here's the thing, right? So there is some sort of, for God, for whatever reason, whatever his choice was, he put angels over different people groups to help him kind of govern them, for lack of a better word for this. And so as a result, what we see is we have Michael here, and then we have this one of Persia. And the one who is Persian, he's not Persian, but he is over the Persian Empire here. He is one of these fallen beings that does not want to deal with this. I don't know if you remember in the book of Job. In the book of Job, it has, the whole thing starts out as God is kind of just like walking down the street or something like that. That's not quite how it goes. And then all of a sudden, like there's some sort of council that's called together. And it has all the angels there, including ones that are fallen. And they oftentimes referred to as sons of God. And how these sons of God, and so basically they say, it's like, the whole story of Job basically is this kind of this weird kind of bet where these demons, as we would refer to them, basically say, but they're referred to as sons of God in the book of Job, are just like, man, like, you've made Job's life easy. Like, he will always worship you. You don't let us do anything to him. So if we could do something to him, then we would see that he would curse your name and die. And so God says, okay. And we know the rest of the story. So the point is, in all this, is that there is these spiritual places. So I've presented something new to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Are evil spirits, demons, fallen angels all the same? Because I know some people don't think that. They think the third of the angels that fell under Lucifer. So some people think Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer are the three archangels and the three princes. So when it says your prince, it might be like your prince as the nation of Israel, Christian prince like you. And Michael is kind of responsible for warfare, that kind of thing. And then Gabriel is more like a messenger angels. And then Lucifer was responsible for praise, so I got like musical instruments built into him and everything. So when he fell, he took those third of angels with him. The biggest insult to him was God creating people to praise him of our own free will, to supplant the angels who were praising him. Our purpose is to bring glory and praise unto God. Not that we're angels, but it's a different dynamic. And so some people think that the fallen angels that are represented, this is what I've heard, the fallen angels that are represented might be different than evil spirits and demons that possess people. And that might be something else. Some people even tie it to the Nephilim. So what are your thoughts?
All right, so number one.
Can of words?
Oh.
And like I said, I was expecting this. There's a lot of ground I got to cover here. I'm not going to do a great job with it, but I'm going to try to do the best I can. All right, so part of that, I've heard the same thing you've heard. A lot of that comes from church tradition. Meaning, if you're not familiar with the Catholic Church, before there were all these different denominations, there's only one shop in town. And so the Catholic Church, their fundamental kind of belief is that the church tradition and the Bible go hand in hand. So basically the teachings of the church and of the Pope and everything is equal to the Bible. So they spend just as much time studying what they would call church tradition as they do the Bible. So, with that said, so where does this tradition come from? Well, a lot of this comes from medieval times where you would have these, monks and different other, the priests and everything would just sit around and they would just think. And they would, this very stereotypical one, if you've heard it, is, well, how many angels can dance on the was it the head of a needle or something like that. And so then they would kind of postulate and kind of think about these things and kind of wrestle with this. And so some of that is really, really good. And some of that is just like, why would we ever care about how many angels can dance on the head of a needle?
However, depending on the size of the needle, depends on how big.
And so,
Size of the angel.
so without, I would have to research your question more. But let me just say this: a lot of that stuff that's taught, where it's like Gabriel's the messenger, Michael is the archangel, Satan must have been in charge of worship and everything, and the whole idea of archangels and everything. Now, there is something to be said for different types of spiritual beings. And this is very, very clear that there are different types of these things. And so, I'm trying to remember this. Basically, we think of Michael, we think of someone who looks like us with a sword, right? But he actually looks like a snake. In fact, I'm trying to remember the imagery. I'm trying to remember the word and the imagery. It's coming off, and I'm going off the top of my head, and I hate kind of doing this. And so I'll have to find that answer for you. But it's one of these things where these spiritual beings look, like the words that they use for like archangel and stuff like. No, it's not. It's seraphim. No. It's not archangels. Is it the seraphim? I think it might be seraphim. Actually is rooted in the word serpent, what we would know it as, which is actually very similar to the Hebrew word for what they call, I'm trying to remember, it's the nada something or other, which basically is the word that they use for snake in Genesis. And so where we think it's a quote unquote serpent, we think it's a snake, and we get all those cartoon Bibles and everything, it may not have been that at all. In fact, Michael Heiser and others will postulate that basically in the Garden of Eden, you had an overlap between the spiritual realm and the earthly realm. And then when the fall of mankind happens, God removes himself from the earthly realm and takes it takes away from that. So the Bible Project has a great video that will kind of explain some of that. But again, if you've never heard that before, you're just like, what? And so the Unseen Realms by Michael Heiser would be the point I would kind of get you to kind of start kind of jumping into that. Like I said, it's weird stuff that we've never thought of before, we don't think about. It's not necessarily something that is taught in Sunday school. It's kind of out there, right? And and the more I study this, the more I'm kind of buying it, but there's a lot to it. So, I don't know if I answered your question at all.
No, it's just.
Do you have any follow-up? I'm trying to.
Good question.
So it's a good question. I'm trying to even remember the question now. I talked a whole bunch. Is there anything you still lack wisdom on that I can try?
I think the main thing is the some people think that the fallen angels that fell when Lucifer fell, that they might be different, and I have no idea, different than the demons or the evil spirits that possess people. I was always wondering, I have no idea on that.
And I'm not sure we have any scriptural evidence for that, and so a lot of that might be coming out of that church tradition that I was talking about, which is some guy was sitting around and thought about it, and he goes, you know what, I like the way this sounds, we're going to roll with it. Michael Heiser at least uses more biblical backing to kind of lay out his argument. So the answer is I don't know. What I do know is this, is that there are different types of spiritual beings. And so cherubim, seraphim are different, and there's a reason why they're different. Michael appears to be, an archangel, is different for whatever the case is. The fact is that what I really wanted to kind of grasp is that there are spiritual forces involved in leading countries. Some might say that there is a very negative demonic presence that is leading the United States. And this is where I want to take a stop, and I'll just say the answer is probably. Now, I'm not thinking that there's some sort of cabal that's like, there are a whole bunch of Satanists at the very top level who are controlling our society. I'm not willing to go that far. However, what I will say is that we shouldn't be shocked, because I don't know if I can claim this for sure, but we are God's people, and so therefore we are not beholden to whatever is governing the United States. And whatever is governing the United States is probably a fallen being and not Gabriel or Michael. So, now, like I said, I'm postulating a lot. I'm just throwing some stuff out there. Call it church tradition, if you will. But I just wanted to give you this, the food for thought here is what we can take away from this clearly, is that there are spiritual beings. There are spiritual beings that are over things, and there is an unseen realm that we can't see where spiritual forces are at work actively fighting each other. And they're fighting each other over the welfare of Christians and over the welfare of the Jewish people. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? I'm really, you keep giving me looks over
How did he
there.
get elected president?
What?
How did he get elected president?
Who?
He's joking.
Michael? Who was it on?
Guy, the bad guy.
Oh.
That guy convincing.
Well,
I still think I think it's kind of like you remember the old cartoons where you had the devil on one side, the angel on the other. I mean, it's like America probably has an evil force in charge, trying to be in charge of it, and a more godly force. And
Yeah.
the seems like the one seems to be winning right now. But
yes.
Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of taken where he said he for 3 whole weeks, how he basically ate no pleasant food, meat or wine or anything, and didn't annoy himself. And then later on, probably the angel said that it had been 21 days. Well, 7 times 3 is 21
Yes.
exactly. So it reminds me of when the disciples were trying to cast out demons, and normally they could, but then there was particularly difficult ones. And Jesus said, these only come from fasting and prayer. And it kind of shows me the power in spiritual warfare of fasting and prayer, because he called on God, and the angel probably tried to come right away, but then he had a type of fast for 21 days and eventually was able to come see it. So it's just
So-
spiritual discipline.
Absolutely. And
it
so,
has an impact in there. It's hard for us to understand how it all plays together.
Right.
Our mind doesn't.
It talks about how he came because he humbled himself, speaking to how important humility is.
so let's think about this, right? 21 days. And the angel basically needed backup from the big guy. Needed Michael to come in and kind of help him get there. Why would the angelic being or heavenly being that is over Persia want to prevent this angel or this being from getting to Daniel?
Daniel's going to do something that would go against that negative angel's wants and desires. Daniel's going to do something good, and if this spiritual being gets through, I don't know, I give up.
Well, the spiritual being was carrying a message to Daniel, correct?
Mhm.
So we'll say demonic being, the prince, whatever. They don't, if they want to thwart
Yes.
the message because they feel if they thwart the message, then then Daniel's not gonna be able to succeed in whatever the message contains.
Bingo. So, hence, we go back to verse 11 here. It says, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you. Right? Like, pay attention. So, as Christians, we should really pay attention to Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12 here, because this is something that spiritual forces spent 21 days trying to prevent us from learning. Now, this is one of those things where how many of you, before I preached on it 2 weeks ago, ever have heard a sermon on it? Or outside of a Bible reading plan have actually just read through it? I mean, some of you might have studied it, but like I said, right, it's not something that's typically kind of looked at. And especially like you think about like storybook Bibles, right? I always pick on those because it's the popular stories that stick with us. And they're important and they're good. But we get Daniel in the Lion's Den, we get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but there's nothing about this. So, anyway, the reason why I bring all that up is basically saying there are spiritual beings that are at play here, and this is something that's very important. And so verse 14 says, now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people for the future. This being wants to make sure that Daniel is aware of what is going to happen. Daniel will create a written account for generations to turn to. And so the book of Daniel is, over the course of history here, has been, especially the Jewish people before the coming of Christ here, is a book that they have rallied around, especially as we go into the why part of this, as we kind of let history play out. So one of the really interesting things is that a lot of scholars will say nowadays, who are not believers in Christ, will basically say, well, Daniel must have been written after the fact. And the reason why it's written after the fact is because of how amazingly accurate it is. So, let's kind of go to, oh wait, I still have this here. So, Daniel chapter 10 verses 20 through 22 says this, and he said, so again, the spiritual being saying, do you know why I have come to you? So I will return to the fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first, I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one who supports me against them except Michael, your prince. Michael is an angelic being that has been assigned to the Jewish people. We talked about that already. And God's angels accomplish his own kingdom's desire. And the kingdom's desire here is to remove Persia and allow Greece to take its place. So this is what is being framed and set up. Where's Daniel living right now? In
Babylon.
Babylon, which is controlled by who?
Persia.
There you go. All right. So basically, again, you have God's people, Daniel, who is now basically caught in the middle of a struggle. And we've heard and we've read about all these different, rams and goats and beasts and statues and everything like that. And we've seen that we know that there was Babylon, and then there was the Persian Empire, or the Medo-Persian Empire. And then from there you had Greece, and from there you have Rome. And so here we have Daniel, basically God is kind of giving a heads up saying, hey, I want the Persian Empire gone. And so I'm going to do what I'm going to do to remove them and bring about Greece into place. And so if we think about Alexander the Great, he is not necessarily known as a very nice person. We call him great, but he's pretty ruthless. And God wanted him. So just kind of wrestle with that and think about that. God puts spiritual beings and causes rises and falls, that he allows all this and he's working this out, that he is the one who's kind of moving things along for the purpose of his future. And we'll talk more about that in a second here. But I wanted you to kind of see that. So, continuing on, verse 11. I underlined it here because there's so much text in this one. So, chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up and confirmed and strengthened him. Again, this heavenly being is talking, right? And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he becomes strong through his riches, he will stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. And then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do so as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. But not his prosperity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So we've been looking at this long enough. If you've been watching the previous videos, you should kind of get an inkling and kind of know what's going on here, right? Well, let's break this down. Mede, right? Again, I stood and confirmed and strengthened him, right? 539 is the decree that allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem here. You have 3 more, and this is the Medo-Persian part of this, right? So then what you have is 3 more kings. So the 3 more kings of Persia shall rise, and these 3 kings would be Cambyses II, Smerdis the usurper. I didn't get a chance to look him up and go in deep, but it sounded really interesting, but there wasn't enough time. Darius the first, and then Xerxes. Interesting enough, I forgot to, so the three, and then I forgot to take that out. The fourth shall be far richer. Xerxes the first was kind of Persian Empire at its biggest. Xerxes was kind of in charge. And Xerxes, what he did, he had an amazing wealth, he amassed a ton of stuff, and he's also blamed for the fall of the Persian Empire because he spent so much in military and raising up military and attacking. Presumably this is when he started skirmishes with Greece. And so then you have all this stuff happens over the course of about 100 years. You have Xerxes and then other kings follow Xerxes here. But basically the Persian Empire begins to decline until this mighty king arise. We know him as Alexander here. And Alexander, he basically destroys Persia. It takes over everything in the entire known world in 10 years. It has the biggest landmass empire to this point. And he does it all in 10 years. Incredible stuff. And so then his kingdom shall be broken, divided into the four winds of heaven. So then the mighty king shall arise, Alexander. And so we know this as Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. These are the four generals who end up kind of taking over, although it's not that clean as I read more about this, but basically you have these four guys who kind of basically take over the empire. So this is probably going to get me into trouble, but I don't have the rights to this. I found it on Pinterest and I put it up there. So this is to help you kind of see and kind of wrestle with this, right? As you can see, you have Greece, you have Thrace, and then you have, the kind of this like tannish color, you have the Seleucid kingdom, and then you have what's down here, you have the Ptolemy's kingdom. So we would know Ptolemy is basically Egypt. Interesting enough, member of the Ptolemaic Empire is Cleopatra. There you go. You might remember that name. So you have the Seleucid Empire. We'll talk more about them in a second. And so it's obvious Seleucid was in charge of the Seleucid Empire. You have Ptolemy was in charge of the Ptolemaic Empire. You have Thrace, which was that Lysimachus? I don't remember. Let me look back here. That was Thrace was controlled by Lysimachus. And then you have Greece, which was controlled by the other guy. So basically, the important thing is that there are two guys and two kingdoms out of these four that really begin to grow. And so eventually what happens is the Seleucid Empire eventually kind of takes over everything over here. And they basically are always we'll get into the skirmishes here. But you got to remember, all these guys were buddies. They were generals and they used to like help each other out. There was another country that was kind of in the middle of this, and so they kind of fought and took control from from Ptolemy, because Ptolemy had this area right here, and so then Seleucid came to his aid and kind of fought back everyone. And all I remember is that this one guy had one eye who was in charge of the country that wasn't there anymore. For what it's worth. Not that important. I know that doesn't really help you with anything. But this is what I want you to see. There's Jerusalem. Eventually things go poorly between the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire. And so therefore, where are the Jewish people going to be?
Stuck in the middle.
Exactly, stuck in the middle. So from here on out, what you're going to see is you're going to hear the Seleucid, the king of the north, or the northern kingdom, is going to be the Seleucid Empire, and the king of the south is going to be the Ptolemaic Empire. And so now what we have, again, Daniel is writing this 100 years, actually 100, like maybe even more, like maybe 150 years before any of this happens. So this is fascinating, right? You ready for the soap opera portion of our study tonight? Okay, so come down a couple generations from was it Seleucid and Ptolemy here, right? And so what you have is Antiochus II. He is in the Seleucid Empire. And basically what happens is that they want to establish a relationship. You know, one of these, you'd have, marriages that would be for basically treaties. Instead of treaty, you'd send your wife. So Antiochus, he is married currently. And he's married at the time. And so what Ptolemy Philadelphus, grandson of Ptolemy here, basically says, hey, marry my daughter Bernice. We're going to make this, stop this fighting and skirmishing between each other. Sounds great. We're going to solidify this, create an alliance. Perfect. So Ptolemy Philadelphus dies. Antiochus is like, I don't really like this woman. I just married her, this woman Bernice. I just married her for the sake of the other guy. Now he's gone. I really like my first wife. So he divorces so he had a wife. Her name, if I can pronounce it, was Laudis. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what I'm going with.
Talked a lot.
She didn't talk that much. She
So Antiochus II is married to Laudis. I don't know. They're married. Divorces her to marry this woman named Bernice to create this alliance. The guy that the alliance is with dies. So Antiochus is like, why do I have to bother with this? Divorces her, remarries his first wife, Laudis. Well, Laudis wasn't a big fan of this whole thing. So she poisoned Antiochus II and then convinces her son, Seleucus Calcine, I don't know. It sounds like a bad disease of some sort. But anyway, basically, Laudis' son to murder Bernice and her child to clear his way to the throne. All right. So, why do I mention all this? Because this is what we literally have in chapter 11 here of Daniel. So if you look at verse 5. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of the princes shall be stronger, and he shall rule, his authority shall be great, and some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south, again, where is Bernice? She's from the Ptolemaic Empire. Is sent where? Shall come to the king of the north and make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he who has his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, and he who fathered her, and that given up is just an Old Testament way of saying dying. And who supported her in those times. And so basically, you kind of see how this is going. There's an alliance happening. This alliance starts to fall apart. Verse 7, and then a branch from her root shall arise in her place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. So, what is that? Well, in Daniel chapter 7, so Bernice's brother, Ptolemy III, takes the throne after his dad dies. He's pretty upset about how his sister's being taken care of. So Ptolemy attacks the Seleucid Empire. He ends up killing Laos, whatever her name is, the ex-wife, and then pillages the Seleucid Empire. So all of a sudden now, and I'm not going to go into detail for the sake of time, but again, what we see, and we have these names of these people, and we can see these battles and wars that are fought between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. They are always at war now as after this happens. And all this has been set up and set into play, and the poor Jewish people are just kind of stuck in the middle. Everybody tracking with me? Now, how cool is that when you actually see this? You're like, a branch from her roots shall arise. Oh, that means a family member. That's Ptolemy the third, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he deals the tough blow and everything. So I hope you're kind of seeing this and kind of wrapping your hands around this. Like, Daniel is saying this 150 years prior to it happening, and then all of a sudden we're seeing it play out. Like, this isn't like, it's more accurate than Nostradamus type stuff, right? Like, Nostradamus is, this is really, like, we're able to kind of pinpoint this stuff. Nostradamus, I don't care how much you say, he didn't say Hitler, all right? We're just going to move on. So, anyway, so the sons wage war, and we can go through and we can track all this. But what I want you to get to is verse 21 here. And this is where enters the infamous Antiochus IV. Now, you might remember that name from before. But then shall arise in his place one who shall send the exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person, who to whom royal majesty has not been given. And he shall come without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. So, really neat stuff, right? Again, got generations. Game of Thrones has got nothing on this here, like the intrigue of generations here. So basically, there is Antiochus IV is really the second son. He's not the first son. And so, but the other guy dies, and so the kingdom is supposed to go to Antiochus's nephew. However, Antiochus IV somehow manipulates his way in and basically able to woo over and take over the Ptolemaic Empire and insert himself as the guy. And then he continues to be this smooth-talking guy who's able to do this. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him, and even broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from that time, so again, like I said, Prince of the Covenant, it's referring to the guy who should have been the king, but now all of a sudden he ends up getting like, oh yeah, I'll take care of you. Oh wait, no, you're not. I'm going to be the guy in charge. So we see Antiochus IV kind of show up on the scene. And what we see here is Antiochus then begins to kind of manipulate and do all these things. Verse 32 here. Actually, let me go to verse 31. The forces shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings, and they shall set up an abomination and make desolation. So, a couple weeks ago, one of us here in the room asked the question about what does it mean to make the abomination that makes desolation here. And so, basically, you have this guy who has come in and even established a relationship. Because remember, we're the Jewish people, they're stuck in the middle. So he comes in and says, hey, I'm trying to take out these guys to your south. So Jewish people, come hang out with me. We're going to make a pact. We're going to do all these things. But what do we know about Antiochus IV? He backtracks on these things. He goes back on the word. There are people who refuse to have any part of him, but he manages to get a foothold within one of the, I don't know if there were Democrats and Republicans back then, but you got one of the political parties to buy into what he was selling. And so as a result, you have this one faction who's like, we refuse. You have this other faction who is like, yay, Antiochus IV is great. And then Antiochus IV, you get buyer's remorse here, because then what he does is the desolation, the abomination that makes desolate, or the desolation of Jerusalem. What they're referring to here is the Jewish people did not want to come under the authority of Antiochus IV. There was a group of the people who did not. And so what he would do is he went into the temple and he basically slaughtered a pig on the altar, which for a Jewish person would have been incredible sacrilege because the pig was an unclean animal. And then he took out in the holies of holies, he put a statue of Zeus in there. And basically what he would do is he would sacrifice every day he would sacrifice a pig and then bring people and ask, are you loyal to me? And if they would say yes, and he goes, well, kneel before, say a prayer to Zeus and eat this pork. And if you didn't, you died. And so there's a lot of stuff, which led to the Maccabee revolt, which is, again, what we're talking about here. And you can kind of get you can see kind of inklings of the Maccabean revolt in this. Anyway, All right, I covered that quicker than I thought I would, but I'm still running low on time. So anyway, so we have all this stuff is going through, and this is what I want to stop. The chapter 11 is fascinating, and it's fascinating because it's already happened, and because it's already happened, we can see all these things and see how accurate the Bible is, how trustworthy it is based off Scripture. To the point where you would have secular scholars who don't want to believe in Jesus, and their response is, well, that just had to be written afterwards. There's no way it could have been written beforehand. There's no way it could have possibly happened. Anyway. So, that's what we have here. Let me see, what else do I have? So, okay, so verse 36. So there's a shift here in verse 36. And the king shall do as he will. So then all of a sudden we have this description of Antiochus the fourth. But we'll get there. Let me read this. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak and astonish things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what he decrees shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his father, or the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god. He shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of the fortress, the God of the fortresses, instead of these, a God whom his father did not know, and he shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortress, that with the help of foreign gods, those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. So, I mentioned this. I think I mentioned this. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned this in the sermon or not. I think I did. I'm looking for it. So, I couldn't find who coined the term. I've been looking for it. But basically what they did is it's been called the law of double reference. And so what we're reading here is apocalyptic literature. We're watching basically, we're looking at what would be like a movie in our sample, right? If we wanted to teach something, we would want to give images to kind of show what's going on. So we just had Veterans Day. So if you think about, one of the things that's always usually done at Memorial Day and Veterans Day, I don't know if they still do this or not, but usually the History Channel shows Band of Brothers. And so Band of Brothers is a image. And so did those events actually happen? The answer is yes and no. There is a combination of different accounts from different people that are kind of all meshed together to kind of give a gritty image of what World War II was like. And it's done extremely well for us to get the feel and evoke the emotion of what it was like to be a soldier then. At the same time, the story is completely made up and completely fictitious. And so what we're looking at here when we read this is we're seeing these images, right? And we're seeing basically what a movie is that's playing out before us, right? There's all these images, but they symbolize things. They recognize. They're supposed to evoke emotion. So this is what Daniel is receiving and giving to us is something that's supposed to evoke emotion. And so what this king does, there's a description of this king. And what it means, what someone has coined the term of is basically this law of, what is it called here? It's the law of double reference. It's basically the law observes the fact that often a passage or block of scripture is speaking of two different persons or two different events simultaneously and separated by a long period of time, one relevant to general time of the prophecy and the other relating to the distant future. What is meant by that is what I said all the time, there's layers to this, right? So this is a description of Antiochus IV, but it's also a description of who's to come, being the ultimate Antichrist. And that's what we see here. This is what you would see as an image of what would be this law of double reference. And this is what it is completely referencing. Let me stop right there. Are there any questions to that? Yes.
I have to make the argument that this is actually a triple reference.
Okay, how so?
Because, and Antiochus, of course, is the first one. And then, Jesus refers to Matthew 24, the abomination of desolation. And Daniel's prophecy specifically that way. But a lot of us would say that may have been referring to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed by the Romans and they set up Jupiter there and stuff. And then perhaps also a later reference to the end times and stuff.
Sure. And I wouldn't argue with that at all. I mean, because the point being is this, right? Is that what we set up, and do I have it here? Do I have it? No, I do not. I believe it's in 1 Peter. There's a reference to there's going to be many antichrists with like a lowercase a, but then there is a capital A antichrist that is to come. And so again, we can look at this over time and we can see that there's always going to be versions of Antichrist, right? Like, let's talk about what's U.S. just won a big soccer game. Yay!
Yeah.
But as a result, what we're seeing, and I don't know if you've seen the news about this at all, there are protests going on in Iran. I don't know if I'm trying to.
Iran.
The only reason why I know is because that silly reporter scolded the poor 24-year-old kid who kicks a soccer ball. Actually, I'm not even sure he's that old. He might be 22. Answered it great, by the way. But the point being is this, right? Is that the Iranian regime can be a version of an antichrist. What you're seeing is someone who is actively thwarting and putting down God's people. We can see that in China. We can see that in North Korea. We can see that in what's called the USSR. We can see that in, to use some more historical examples here, we can see this throughout history. That all the time we see is these leaders who are raised up and ultimately are against God's people and try to do harm and try to do these things. They all kind of follow the same characteristics. And they are characteristics like this. They do as he wills. He sees himself as his own God. There's nothing new under the sun, to kind of quote the Bible here, right? I had to go back to the book of Ecclesiastes, like everything. And so you see this time and time again. And the constant question is, how do these people end up in power? Because ultimately, we can go back to the Jewish people, and we basically say even the Jewish people, right? Their ultimate rejection of God and desiring to have a king. And ultimately, everybody's always looking for a king to serve. And that's how these people end up in power. Because our focus is taken off God and is turned towards people. It's turned towards what we can get out of it. So whether that is an elected official, whether that a political candidate, whether that is a Kardashian, I don't know. They're popular for a reason, right?
I mean, everybody likes watching a train wreck.
Nope.
That might be more someone's divorced husband, but that's another story. Anyway, point being is this, right? I don't know, Kanye West, yay, whatever he goes by.
Does it matter?
He needs help. Anyway, where am I? The point being is this, right? Is they all follow the same characteristics. We always see them going along these same things. So, take a second, I stop. We're almost out of time. I'm going to have to cover the last section real quick here. Are there any questions before I go on? Kind of tracking with me. So, I want you to keep this in mind. Why does Daniel go through this? Why was it so important that the Prince of Persia fought so hard for 21 days to keep this messenger getting to Daniel? Why was it so important for Daniel to write all this down?
So they could pass it
Certainly
on.
wouldn't have remembered it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's true.
He was pretty smart.
Write it down.
Well, it was the beginning of an epic battle. I mean, from that, what they're bringing is the message that they're bringing. The Prince of Persia is so set against it coming down. I mean, he knows that it's got to be big. Like, he may even know what it is. I don't know. I don't know how he knows that he has to thwart that message coming to Daniel. I mean, how else does he know? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Some might argue, you could argue one side of this, that basically that this was going to be the beginning of the end, and so, he didn't want this to come through. But really what he's trying to do is whatever the case is, he's trying to stop God's people from hearing this message. And I think that's the important thing to kind of remember all this, is that the Jewish people are God's people. And now us as Christians are God's people under the new covenant. And because we are under this new covenant, again, it's not written to the Ptolemaic Empire or the Seleucid Empire. It's not written to any of these. It's written to us. It's written to his people to kind of prepare us, to kind of know. It's really cool to basically be like that how important this is I'm giving you this whole proof text of basically 11:5 through 35, in which you can point to every king and every single thing that happens and unwrap history to it because of how accurate it is, so that now I can lay out who the Antichrist is and all these characteristics of this and what's going to happen, and basically not only for your current time but times to come, as well as the ultimate end times and what that's going to look like with that capital A Antichrist. But then we get to chapter 12. And the true message to all this is this, and this is why it's so important. And so I'm going to read verses 1 through 4 here. And at the end of the time, shall arise Michael, a great prince who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never seen since there was a nation, till that time. But the people shall be delivered, and everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shall shut up the words and seal this book until the time of the end. And many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Kind of didn't read that well, but let me just say this, right? So many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Let's talk about this. One of the things that really kind of separates us in modern history right now is it used to be the knowledge of the human race would double every 100 years. And now it's doubling every 6 months. And so we are in this time of knowledge. And it's not going to slow down. Am I saying that the world's going to end tomorrow? No. Could it? Yes. Mm-hmm. But no. What I'm saying, I'm not trying to make a prediction about that. What I'm saying is this, is that we are in this time of knowledge where more and more is known. More and more, we're understanding more. We're it's amazing what this things that we've learned in the last 10 years has just been astronomical. It's going to continue to grow. And so the point is that we're moving in this direction. And as we move in this direction, what we're going to see, again, there's a command of Daniel. That you're supposed to take this in a book and shut it up, right? That you're supposed to keep this for the last days. This is going to be a guide for the last days. And in that last days, what we're going to find is that there is going to be some sort of resurrection. Or shall awake. Because the way they used to say this in the Old Testament is Old Testament times is you took the big dirt nap or the big sleep here, it was you died. And so that's what they're referring to. And so basically, what we get to look forward to is that the dust of the earth here in chapter 12 verse 2, so that those who sleep in the dust of the earth, those who have died, because death was never a part of God's original creation, but because of sin and separation that entered into the world in Genesis chapter 3, that this dust has been kind of brought from the dust we came into the dust that we will return, but God is going to come and raise us up from that dust again, and we have been raised through the Son of Man. And this is the point, is that something is going to come. And something is going to come that is going to be great and incredible. And this is what we get to look forward to. Let's see here. So there is this resurrection. And then in addition to that, then I, Daniel, verse 5 here, looked, and behold, two others stood on the bank and stream. And someone said, the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters and stream, how long it will be to the end of these wonders? And then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters and stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and a half time, and when the shattering of the power of the holy people shall come to an end, and all these things shall be finished. And I heard, but I did not understand. And then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? And he said, go away, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. And so basically what we have here is all these antichrists, this cycle that we're on, this continuing struggle, this continuing strife, eventually all this is going to be broken. Now I can give you the kind of everybody's thought process on the times, and then and then halftime and everything like that. There's a lot of interesting graphs and things you can look at. I don't know when it's going to happen. I'm not going to go into that, especially because we're almost out of time. But one of the things we get to look forward to is that there will be an eternal rest. That all this strife, all this fighting, all this where we are basically stuck in between warring kings of the north and the south. We're always stuck just trying to be God's people, but always being forced into the abomination of desolation, right? All these things that eventually we will get to enter into peace and rest, and it'll all be done in God's time. And so that is why it's so important that we have the book of Daniel. And it's really neat to look at this through history. It was always something that people clung to for hope and peace throughout the Jewish empire, or not Jewish empire, as empires rose and fall around Jerusalem during this time frame. The people clung to this book and basically said, we have this book that we get to say, we see how we're supposed to stand up to these kings who are going to force us to turn our back on God, because we have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We have a story about how to remain pure and how we're supposed to continue on in the face of hardship, with the story of Daniel when he's first being taught. We have all these beautiful things, and we get to kind of recognize this, and there was always a book that is supposed to comfort us. It's always a book that we're supposed to cherish, and we have this message of hope that all the problems and the hardships will be shattered eventually, and we will enter into eternal rest. And that is why this message is so important, because if you're going to win a battle, if you're going to win a fight, what do you need? You need hope. And if you don't have any hope, then you're willing to give up and just surrender. And this is one of the reasons why I will argue why that Prince of Persia fought so hard from letting Daniel hear this message. Because what we have is we have hope in what is to come, and hope in our God. So, there you go. Hopefully it was good. I don't know. Any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, rebuttals? Yes.
I'm sure, a stupid question.
No, I'm sure it's not.
She's got a novel written over here.
Did the king, after he sacrificed the pig,
Antiochus IV, yes, okay.
and did he cook it before he made them eat it? Seriously.
I did
that's
not
all
come
wanna
across
know.
anything in my writing that said if it was cooked or not. I do not know.
I had a question too.
Yes.
So in verse 37,
Of what chapter? Chapter 11?
Chapter 11.
All right. Verse
I always wondered about this because my Bible words it differently, and it's slightly more ambiguous than the way you had phrased it. So mine says, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. Which to me, the way it's written here, just surface reading, sounds like he's saying that he doesn't care about women. Like he's either homosexual or asexual, completely doesn't care about women. But the way it was worded on the scripture on the screen was that he did not regard the God of his fathers, nor the God that women like.
And I would probably take the ESV on this one, but I do not have that Hebrew in front of me right now. We can bust it out and look at it real quick.
The NIV more like that's ESV.
This is a King James version, but not the old King James version.
So one of the, well, we won't get into textual criticism right now. There's no perfect translation, so there's always going to be some.
Is there a place in the New Testament that also talks about that, or is that only here, where the Antichrist would not have a desire for women?
I don't remember any reference to that in
But-
Revelation.
So this is the only place.
So let me just say this: is that
Well,
he
is
shall
it a
pay.
little A or
He
big
shall
A?
no. When he says that he shall pay no
Read,
attention
read.
to the gods of his father, or to the beloved of his women. So one of the things is that Antiochus the fourth is also known as, where is it? His nickname, it was. Let me just confirm this here. Where's my little graph? So literally. All right. How cool is this? This is the ESV Study Bible. This is the two lines of the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire, and we have all these, so we can kind of chart all this stuff. But Antiochus IV, his nickname, he also went by Epiphanes, I believe is the right way of pronouncing that. And
Slightly ironic.
Epiphanes means God manifest. And so he saw himself as a God, that he was God manifest. That's what he nicknamed himself. So
That's why it says he will exalt himself above them all. My note says the one desired by women may refer to Tammuz, a Babylonian fertility god. Tammuz is also mentioned in Ezekiel 8:14. In other words, this person won't recognize any deity or religion at all, not even pagan ones. Instead, he will proclaim himself to be divine and the ultimate power.
That sounds like an
Makes
epiphany.
sense.
And so one of the things, and this is the ESV study note, says that one beloved by women, probably the god, the god Adonis or Dionysus. Instead, he worshipped Zeus, a god who embodied military strength. But all these gods were still in the Greek pantheon, and thus there were some questions about Antiochus IV abandoning the gods of his father instead of worshiping the gods of fortresses, i.e. military power and might. So for what it's worth, basically saying that he trusted in how strong he was in military might instead of all these gods. And so that's kind of thought process. So,
Will make war his god.
so any other questions? All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that was beneficial. Hopefully I didn't bore you. Hopefully I kept it interesting. Let me pray for us. Lord Jesus, Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for just who you are. And Lord, I thank you so much that you felt it necessary to literally fight the spiritual forces of this world, Lord God, to make sure that we could have the message of Daniel. That you will shatter this cycle of antichrists. That you will shatter the brokenness of this world. And that you will restore it. When Jesus came, you restored it. And then you will restore it when he comes back again. And we praise you for that. And we glorify you. And we thank you that we can trust that we have eternal life and a resurrection in you.